This is one of my favourite videos we've ever created, the 5 different ways in which to choose a colour palette. And if you know anything about my work, you will know I love colour, but I have a very methodical approach to how I choose colours for a design. Now this video is taken from our Creativity Method virtual course. That's a course that actually isn't freely available. It comes as part of a challenge series we run. Don't worry about any of that. The main thing is I wanted to make this video open access public because I absolutely love it, and a little Christmas gift from me to you. In the hierarchy of design, the thing we first talk about is colour. I think colour is the most important thing about a piece of art. And so that is what we're going to focus on first. I want you to throw out any ideas about designs or anything you might be intending to do like that. And this time we're just going to focus on getting colour palettes, choosing colours, ways to do it, all the tools, basically give you everything I know so you build up your confidence in colour. I believe a good colour palette can save a bad design, but a good design cannot shine with a bad colour palette. Take, for example, the piece I'm working on now, which I'm very pleased with, but this piece here, I feel like it's a good design, and it's made strong by the fact it has a strong, cohesive, bold colour palette. If I took this exact same design, but I combined it with a really confused, excessive, varied colour palette, I think it would absolutely detract from the design itself. I think the colour is a thing that makes the design possible. And the same goes for things like if you go into a gallery. Whenever I walk into a gallery, the thing that draws me over to a painting is always the colour. When I get to the painting, I'll start to look at the design and I'll decide from that whether I like it or not. But it's the colour that made me want to come and have a look at it in the first place. And the same goes for life. I feel like when I go to a clothes shop, I'm drawn to the colour. When I go to choose a food thing off the shelf, I'm drawn to the packaging, the colour of the packaging. There's a reason why people are more likely to click on a button on a website if it's orange or blue, because we are drawn to colour. And so I think that you should be really focused on, above anything, finding colours that you like. Now, when I'm thinking about colour, I don't just look at textile artists, but I look across a range of different artists, and I think some of the artists I constantly refer back to who have a real strong use of colour, namely people like Matisse or Picasso earlier spoke about, but other artists like Howard Hodgkin or David Hockney, Helen Frankenthaler, Eileen Agar, Richard Dieberkorn, some of these artists, and then there's people like Bonnard, Gauguin, or people like Peter Doig. I adore Peter Doig's colour combinations. There's quite an unusual colour often thrown in there. Refer to the artists you like that use colour and know that you can use that as inspiration even if you're working in an entirely different medium. What you should think about is what colours do you like? Because what I like is not necessarily going to be what you like. If we look through the same book, we're likely going to be drawn to different images and different artwork within it. What is often quite hard is for us to feel confident in saying, I like that or I don't like that. You can feel a bit intimidated to say, I like it, because you feel like you have to understand why do I like it. But really don't worry about that. I'm going to say that for this and then also for the later Finding Inspiration chapter. Do not overthink anything. Go with your instinct. Go with what speaks out to you. There is no right or wrong answer when it comes to choosing colour. Everything I'm going to show you is what called out to me, but that won't necessarily be the same for you. So first and foremost, I want to walk you through 5 different ways you can choose colour palettes. And these increase in levels of kind of difficulty as you go through it. So we're going to start with number 1, which is colour drench. One of the simplest things to do if you are not totally sure how to work with colour is to pick one colour and just colour drench with it. If you colour drench a piece, it will have a strength of character by the fact it hasn't got a lot of variety going on. And so what I mean by colour drenching is picking a central tone and just varying the colour palette around that tone. So say on this wall behind me, this piece up here, which is all the pinks landscape, that is a colour drenched piece, even down to the frame that's with it. Everything is these shades of pink and purple, and it is very cohesive. That colour palette is a very safe colour palette to pick because I basically just pick a central tone and I work those tones out around it. What I do know is I will never compete with that colour palette, with the design, that colour palette will always be quite successful. And say if I look at this one I've got here, this is one of my next pieces that I'm going to work on. And again, this is a colour drenched design. So as much as, you know, there's definitely a bit of tonal variety versus this, I've gone entirely down the blues and the turquoise route. Now, one thing I'm intending to do is add in one little contrast in olive, but that makes it a far more complicated colour palette to choose. So don't worry about that yet. If you're first right at the outset of choosing colours and you like strong colours, maybe you like an orange, then pick a palette which is all sorts of burnt oranges, peaches, reds. Pick that palette, it will all work. So second up is the colour wheel. And when you're coming to choosing colour palettes, if you're not super confident, then we can refer back to basic colour theory. If you use the colour wheel to choose your primary colour and your secondary colour, then you will find that you can come up with quite satisfying colour palettes. So let me just remind you of the colour wheel. So you have your primary colours, you have your yellow, red, and blue. And then you have your secondary colours, which you get by mixing together your primary colours that are side by side. So you have the combination of red and blue is purple. You have orange, which you get by mixing red and yellow together. And then you have green, which you get by mixing together yellow and blue. Now, the way that colour theory works is that every colour is the complementary colour of its opposite. So, for example, blue is the complementary colour of orange. And there's a saying which goes, every colour is a lover of its opposite and a friend of its neighbour. So, for example, that would mean that blue is the complementary colour to orange, but blue also gets along very well with red and with yellow. So if you were working with that theory in mind, you would just come up with colour palettes that play into that. So let me show you that in action. So this piece directly behind me plays exactly into that idea. This piece is entirely based on complementary colours. I have my blue fabric, which is my most dominant colour, and all my threads are in shades of orange. So I'm using the complementary colours. Or likewise, this piece here is again using the neighbouring colours idea. So this is really a colour palette of blue and red. They're the two most dominant shades within this piece. So again, I've taken my colour wheel and I've said, right, blue gets on well with red. So I'm going to combine those two together. You could do the same, you could say blue and yellow, or you could do green and purple. You could do green and orange, you know. The theory goes like that. So when you're working with colour, if you're new to colour, then one of the ideas you can do is to say, I'm going to use the colour wheel to help me choose my colour palette. Now I'm going to segue here into the idea of how many colours should you have in a colour palette. And you could say, well, how long is a piece of string? But I am really a firm believer that you should keep your colour palette tight. You don't want to have loads of decisions, and you also want it to feel strong. And I think if you look at a lot of pieces of art, actually the colours that are used throughout them are quite narrow. Often there won't be a vast number of colours. So when I look at my own work, I always limit myself to 6 or 7 colours. And what does that mean? That means the fabric is one colour, and that will always be my most dominant colour in my work. And then I would have 5 or 6 threads to combine with it. No more. If I have more than that, it becomes confusing. They don't all serve a purpose. I want every colour within a piece to serve its own purpose. So when it comes to choosing your own colour palettes, I really recommend working in a similar way. And that is why I'm going to bring on to the next topic, on the next way of choosing colours, which is around screen printed fabrics. As if to prove my point, for the next way you can choose colour palettes, I want to talk about screen printed fabrics, and this ties into the 5, 6 or 7 colours you should have within a palette. So, screen printed fabrics are an amazing way to choose colours for your piece, because the beauty of a screen printed fabric is it has been printed in layers, and the person printing it and the company printing it cannot print in a vast number of layers because it's so expensive. You know, every single time you print a layer, it costs more money. So when you look at screen printed fabrics, you're already looking at a really narrow colour palette. So the next method to choose colours is to go look at a screen printed fabric, find a fabric you like, and then identify what colours are in it. So all these sample fabrics here are by the Austrian designer Josef Frank. And I adore Josef Frank's use of colour. And they're quite unusual. But when you look at them, there's actually quite a limited number of colours in it. This really does leverage the idea of 5 or 6 colours. And so one way to pick a colour palette would be to go out and get a swatch of a fabric you like and just match the colours. And you match the colours. I have one of these big books that matches my threads, and I use the company DMC. So I kind of can go in and I can find the relevant colour. You know, here this is the same sort of red. I can pick the same one. You know, that's how I could do it. Or if you're not working in fabric and thread, you're working in, you know, paint, you could go out and find the exact matches in paints to the design you want. If you're working in paper, you could go buy some kind of buy some of the George Smith colour plan papers, which have a million different shades of paper, and you could perfectly colour match the shades to this. You know, you can do this regardless of your medium. You can pick your glazes based on this. So you are referencing something pre-existing. You are making someone else's decision work for you. And so you go on and use these fabrics to choose your own. So that's the 4th idea when it comes to how you can choose a colour palette. So the 5th way you can choose a colour palette is to use a colour reference book. And this is not cheating, because you will go on and you can use these in exactly your own way. They're designed for a reason. But I've got 2 different types here. So these are some little Japanese colour books, and then I've got these ones here by Papier Tiger, but they serve the same purpose. So what I have in these is basically just loads of different colour palettes. And they're colour palettes that someone else has gone through and chosen. Exactly the same here, and this one just uses a narrower range of colour palettes, you know, 3 or 4 colours. Again, you see how a lot of these, they don't use a lot of colours, or these ones here, where it matches up the colours and then across to the side it shows the basic colours, but then shows them in combination. And these are basically saying someone else has gone and done the hard work of working out a load of satisfying colour combinations. All you now have to do is just use it. It's a way of choosing colour in a way that feels much safer and less risky. Also, don't feel like you're not going to be yourself then if you do something like this, because if we both went through this book here and we had to flick through it, we would be drawn to different pages within the book. So the fact that we're using a book doesn't mean you lose your character, unless you intend to stitch, you know, all together here. There's 450 colour combinations in each one of these books. That's 5 books there. I've got like 2,000 combinations. We are never going to stitch or make something from all of these. So use them. Don't be afraid to use it. But the key thing, if you're using something like a reference book like this, is that you have to perfectly match the colour up. Because even a slight tonal shift within one of these can throw off the entire colour palette. It can throw the balance out. So let me show you how I have some colour palettes that go with something like this. So within this book, and here, I have these little bags, and these are little bags of colour palettes that I've already put together for my piece. I'll just put a neutral colour down so you can see. But say this one, I say page 165. So I'm going to take you to page 165. Let's go. Here. And look, here I have my colours from this colour palette. I've gone through and I've gone in and I've matched up the colours that go within it. And I've taken one colour palette. Or, let's go again. Say, I'm going to go, this one is page 64. Page 64. So here's my page 64. And again, you see, I've brought in the colour palettes that will go with that particular piece. And then what I do is I can take that colour palette and test out, well, I want to now take that colour palette and I want to put it onto a bit of fabric. So I'm going to test out that colour palette on a range of different fabrics. Maybe I'd go all on the orange, or maybe we go for a contrasting colour and I'd go entirely on the greens. Find one that works for me. But I've effectively allowed someone else to make a decision, and I've just made it all quite fun. It's not stressful choosing colours when you work like this. What you'll notice is I have all my colour palettes bagged up here, and right at the end I'm going to go on and just explain why I have that and why I have all my colour palettes ready to go. So that's the fifth way you can choose colour palettes, is by using all these little marvellous little books. So for the sixth way of doing it, this is quite an incredible tool that's available free online. I'm going to use my computer, and this is the Adobe Color Palette Selector. So say you want to come up with something more inspired by something you have seen out and about. Maybe you've seen a painting, maybe you've seen an interior, maybe you've seen an item of clothing, maybe you've just seen a really lovely landscape. You want to come up with a colour palette based on something you've experienced in your everyday life. Well, you do not have to worry, because Adobe have come up with a way for this. So I'm going to show you, and we'll split to a picture of my screen. So Adobe have come up with this tool called the Adobe Color Palette Selector. And what you can do is you can go on here and you can select a file. And so I'm going to go, I've saved down a few pictures. So I say start with this one, which is Matisse's famous painting, Red Room. And you can see on the screen, what I have here is I can choose all my different colours. It's basically pulled out for me what it sees as the dominant colours within the piece, but it also gives me the option of switching. So I can switch to look at the bright ones, the more muted tones. I can go deep on the deeper colours, or I could look at the darks. And using this tool, it pulls out the exact codes I want, and then I can use that to help me choose my colour palette. So let's try. We can try with the Gauguin painting here, which I've always adored this painting. And again, it gives you the ability to choose a colour palette based on something you've seen. Or I go for something I've seen out and about. So it might be here, like this interior picture I've seen. Again, I'm pulling out different colours from within the room itself. I've got the brighter one, I've got a muted one, a deep one, dark one. Every single one of these would make a really beautiful colour palette. Or I go back to ones which I maybe find it a little hard to pull the colours out on, like this Peter Doig painting here, which has quite a lot of colours going on. This one is quite a nice one for looking at and seeing how does it vary if I just look through these different things, and maybe then off the back of it I can choose a colour palette that I particularly like. But finally, one way you can also use this is to iterate on your own colour palettes you used in the past. So say if I take a sample from one of my own embroideries. Now this one's sort of pulled out quite a similar colour palette to the existing embroidery, but then I have the ability to also switch this around. And maybe I come up with something a little bit unexpected, a little bit different. By using something like this, I can iterate on a colour palette I've done that I like, of my own, and come up with a slightly new variation on it. So use this tool. But the key thing with all of this is, remember along the way you have chosen the picture to put in it. We will have chosen different pictures, and so if you do choose to use a tool like this, you are not losing your originality. You are just enabling your originality in a way that makes you feel confident. Now, as you saw earlier, I already have these little bagged up colour palettes, and there's a very clear reason why I do that. One of the things I don't want to happen is I do not want my design I create to inform my colour palette. Just because I might be stitching a scene with a tree in it, because I might be doing something with mountains in, doesn't mean I need particular colours. I don't need green if I'm doing trees. I don't need white if I'm doing snow. I can use colours that feel very different, and through that my artwork will feel more sophisticated and a bit more original. Sometimes changing the colours entirely from what is the obvious choice actually is what makes a piece feel really unique, feel really creative. It's one of the constant things that you will notice throughout folk art over time, is that more often than not, the colours do not align with what we actually see in the everyday world. So by bagging up my colours and saying, I'm going to use this regardless of what design I come up with next, and by doing my design entirely in black and white, one does not inform the other. I am making separate decisions. The second thing about this is when you start creating a piece of art, whether you are stitching, whether you're collaging, whether you're printing, you will start to doubt yourself. The moment you begin, you will start to think, oh gosh, does that colour palette really work? You'll start to think, oh, do I need another colour? Maybe I need to add a contrast. But every single time you do that, you actually end up weakening the original decision you made. By bagging up my colour palette right at the beginning, it means that I have made that decision and I can't come back to it. I am really disciplined about, if I'm working on a piece of art and I've already chosen my colour palette, I am super disciplined about not adding or removing colours as I go. And the key thing to bear in mind is, regardless of what medium you're working in all likelihood, you won't feel like the piece is coming together until you're 80-90% of the way through it. For the first sort of 80% of the way, you will have doubts and you will be worrying that it's not working. What you have to do is power through the doubts. If in those moments of doubt you go and add another colour, then you will weaken the overall decision you made right at the beginning. So I keep my colour palettes bagged up, I keep them on the side, and whenever I've got a new design ready, I go pick a random colour palette and I use it for that design. I do not add, I do not take away, and I think that is how you keep your colours strong. So the final thing I'm going to say around places to avoid looking for colour is, even though we mentioned it in the Adobe section, is nature and outside and real life objects, because one of the challenges when you look to those for colour is that the colours are very blended. So you could do it where I could take a picture of a beautiful landscape and I could put it into the Adobe colour generator and I could pick a colour palette off the back of that. That's totally fine. But if I just went out and I thought, oh, I'm going to stitch, a floral scene, or I'm going to stitch this interior scene that I've got, the danger is that you will forget what you saw, and so you won't feel that same confidence in the colour palette if you haven't gone through a process of choosing it, and you might find yourself tempted to add a little bit and take away a little bit because of the fact the colours that you started with weren't super defined. So I would avoid doing anything too fluid that doesn't rely on a fixed set of 5 or 6 colours, because I think that is the way that you will maintain strength of colour palette in your work. Now that's a lot of different methods, and you could spend a lot of time now just going through all those methods and just playing around and choosing colours. The most important thing is getting to the making stage, so don't spend too long on the Adobe thing. Just have a go, and when you get one colour palette that you're quite happy with, then choose that and then move on to the next stage. Try not to lose yourself in the steps along the way, because you'll find that you actually never get to making and you just spend the entire time bagging up colour palettes and never using them for anything.